Hello, my name is Alexandra Emanuele. I'm the digital content editor with GFSR. Today I'm speaking with Cesar Barallo. Cesar is a lawyer who focuses on national and international food labeling and food regulatory issues. We're going to be speaking about global standards and food safety today. So thank you for chatting with me, Cesar.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Alexandra. Thank you.
So you wrote an interesting blog article on the FDA recognizing Australia's food safety system. I know you mentioned when we were chatting before that you felt like that was a little bit of an outdated example, but the idea remains. So the FDA recognizing another country's food safety system. Can you explain the importance of that?
Yeah. I think that the US recognized also Canada as an equivalent food safety system, but for example, they didn't recognize Europe as equivalent, despite the high food safety standards that we have. And this is not strange, I would say, because our different systems clash many times in years, but it's peculiar because in this way, there are a lot more difficulties for our exporters to access the US market and vice versa without a formal equivalence agreement on the standards. We have a limited agreement, for instance, in the organic sector. In that sector, we have an equivalence agreement, and this agreement is allowing US farmers and producers to grow their vegetables, their ingredients according to the National Organics Program of the USDA, and then export to Europe without further restrictions or a lot of red tape. And the same goes for European companies. But this agreement is limited to the organic sector indeed. So for all the rest, we have to check if in the other system there are different food safety or labeling rules and adapt our the composition of the food, the labeling of the food, check all the levels for contaminants, pesticides, and so on. So it's a very complex operation. In this moment, we don't have really the same standards. Some people are also criticizing US. They don't want any kind of commercial agreement between EU and US. You should remember all the discussion under the TTIP, when it was discussed between the Obama administration and EU. But it's a fact that there are a lot of non-tariff barriers in place, different regulatory standards that hinder the free trade between good partners like EU and US.
So what do you think would need to happen for more countries to recognize each other's food safety systems as being comparable, or maybe the right word is compatible?
Yeah, I think that in future, and I hope that in future, we will see more systems that will recognize each other. But this is an operation that cannot happen from one day to another, because anytime you speak of equivalence between food safety standards, some consumers are really uncomfortable because they think that the other trade partner, the other country has lower standards. It's something that is happening also now with Brexit, because now UK is exiting from Europe, so they are, let's say, forced to find new partners, to strike new trade agreements, and food safety is on the table because they were a bit in a rush of closing some trade deals with Asian countries, with US as well. And so this topic of the different standards and the lower protection that is offered from certain countries to their consumers has been raised again by the consumers. So you have to prepare the consumers and the market and the companies to this equivalence agreement a bit in advance, I would say, to make them comfortable and to ensure them that the standards will not be lowered, because of course nobody wants unsafe food and so on. But I think that we will see more convergence in the future, a bit because we are using basically the same private standards everywhere, okay? We have different systems recognized under GFSI, the Global Food Safety Initiative. Okay, we might prefer BRC or EFS or 22,000. There are different schemes but the core of those schemes is the same.
Mhm.
We have also the Codex Alimentarius as international standardization body that is giving guidance on certain topics. So we have a common baseline that is adopted by all the countries. And so in a more globalized environment, I think that in the future we will see more trade agreements and more equivalence agreement, but it will never be something easy, you know, to get. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, COVID has been a global pandemic. It has affected countries in a variety of ways. How do you think the global standards have helped or hindered food safety during this pandemic?
Well, surely the fact that we have global standards helped. But on the other side, COVID-19 has been a bit of a step back in this process of globalization and harmonization of standards, okay? Because certain countries, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, closed their borders or stopped the export of strategic commodities like rice, grain, because they feared that famine or scarcity of certain resources. So they were, especially in Asia, for instance, where rice is very political raw material. It's not just it's not just food. It's something that is strictly related with politics and policies. Certain countries stop the export or close their borders because they fear to have no supplies. So this period has been a bit more rigid than usual when we look at international trade. But it's a phase, okay? For sure, we will move on, and the trade relationship will start again. And here, the global standards are very important because they are the base for each attempt of harmonization. We have to find a common ground to start with. It doesn't matter if it's food safety or labeling, but we need a starting point. And often the standards set by the Codex Alimentarius are the baseline because they are adopted by most countries and especially emerging countries where the regulation is not so developed rely a lot on Codex. And then again, we have the private standards that are in certain cases more rigid than the law itself, more strict than the law itself. And in certain countries that I visit as well are basically raising the bar and raising the food safety level more than the regulatory efforts of the authorities. I've been in Paraguay some years ago, so middle of the South America, not really, let's say, a very developed economy and country when it comes to food safety, but they have big chains, big players like, I don't know, Pizza Hut, or I cannot remember honestly, okay, but those kind of KFC, McDonald's, can't remember. But all the suppliers that were working in those supply chains or in the supply chain of stevia, they are a big producer of stevia, were adopting standards that were much more better than the common small business, small company there. So the global standards might be a leverage to lift up the level of safety of the food, the level of the standards. And the same goes for labeling. Labeling is not harmonized at all. We have a lot of issues, and no common ground on certain elements like nutrition information. You can find 20 different kind of nutrition tables on a product if you travel across the globe. Maybe the product inside the pack is the same, but according to local rules, you have different values, different tables, different means of expression. So it's the same. But let's say that the food supply chain has demonstrated a certain resilience during the COVID pandemic. Okay, I'm not sure in Canada, US, but I think that the situation with the toilet paper was worse than the one with the food. Basically, we all had food during the pandemic, and we never saw, the shelves empty in Europe. Okay. For sure, the very globalized supply chains were a bit in difficulty at the beginning because some borders closed. Yeah, but
Certainly. I think it's
Yeah.
it's positive to know that the global standards are lifting everyone up and ensuring that safety is met by all countries and all kind of industries, basically.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Cesar, for chatting with me. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.